In 2012, a man by the name of Aaron Swartz was threatened with 50 years in prison for downloading academic articles that he was legally allowed to read. And recently, a trillion-dollar company by the name of Meta pirated, stole millions of books and fed them to its AI, with the CEO approving it, and that trillion-dollar corporation never faced a single criminal charge. This is yet another story of the two-tiered system in America where some people can just do whatever they want and others cannot. If you don't know the story of Aaron Swartz, this will be a very interesting and eye-opening video for you that might make you think a little bit, okay? We tried to do our best to research this as effectively as possible, but there is a lot, and we're all idiots. Aaron Hillel Swartz was a technological prodigy whose vision of informational freedom would ultimately place him in the crosshairs of federal prosecutors. Aaron was a real living genius, and by the age of 14, he had co-authored the RSS. He co-authored the 1.0 specification that revolutionized web syndication and allowed things like podcasts to blow up and become easy to watch. Before the RSS feed, you had to check individual sites for posts to see if there was anything new, like walking into every store each day to see if there's fresh stock or what's available. But with the RSS, it's like all the stores agreed to send you a standardized daily delivery box that always lists exactly what's new, but in the same format. So it's a delivery sorter, if you will. An RSS reader, you can put it all neatly on your shelf. It's incredible. It's a revolutionary thing that most people don't even think about because it's just such a part of what we do now. And Aaron, at 14 years old, co-authored this, helping make the delivery box not only universal, but also expanding it so sites could include extra information like author names, metadata, categories, or whatever else they wanted without breaking the system. This is all pretty early internet history, by the way, and Aaron wanted the internet not to just be a cool new thing that required geniuses to use, but rather an amazing new thing where the world was within reach for everyone.
You know, at your fingertips, you wouldn't have to talk to anybody. It would just be instantly available. And I remember, I couldn't wait until the whole world was on the internet and I never had to call anybody again.
Aaron specifically could recall the moment the internet went from a niche thing to a widely propagated tool. Websites, something so familiar now, used to be nearly non-existent. Everything was just local.
I think the moment where I realized the internet really had taken off was when I started seeing URLs in advertisements. And you would see it on huge billboards, right? And on the sides of buses, you'd see it everywhere. And suddenly, this thing that was this kind of obscure, geeky thing that just you and your friends knew, that was just part of the culture.
It's crazy to think about that now with all of the online privileges that we have, all of the information we have available, and we're still all stupid. Anyways, back to Aaron. By the age of 19, Aaron had helped build Reddit after merging his startup Infogami through Y Combinator's first program, rewriting Reddit's entire codebase from Lisp to Python. He's the original Redditor, and his collaboration with John Gruber produced Markdown, which is the lightweight markup language now used by GitHub, Discord, and countless other platforms. In fact, my note-taking, where all of these things are written and stored, is on Obsidian, which is a Markdown note-taker. Schwartz's genius extended beyond code. He saw technology as a tool for democratizing knowledge and challenging concentrated power. Swartz helped develop the Internet Archive's open library, making a free book database that anyone could use, and he was also an early architect for Creative Commons, a nonprofit dedicated to the open sharing of knowledge and culture. The guy was truly a visionary and pioneer in the early internet, and all of these things most of us use and just completely take for granted once again, but he helped create them. In my opinion, Aaron could have ridden the merits of his skill to the very top if he wanted to, even outshining the most notable people in digital innovation today. For example, that guy with the broccoli head, Mark Wahlberg. That's not Mark Wahlberg, that's Mark Zuckerberg. But instead of being seduced by wealth and ambition, he was pulled into a very different direction. Even as Silicon Valley courted him with the seduction of wealth, with Reddit's sale to Condé Nast for $10 million, which absolutely had to have been insanely tempting at age 20, Swartz felt called to activism. Aaron left Reddit in 2007 after being asked to leave by his boss because he was unable to stomach corporate culture, and decided to turn his talents towards liberating information. Aaron's 2008 Guerilla Open Access manifesto crystallized his very unique philosophy. Information is power, but like all power, some want to keep it for themselves. This is before everything was just available on the internet. It seems so different. Like, you can just look stuff up now. You can ask an AI if you're a secondhand thinker. I'm not sure. This is all before that, before the epicness that is the internet. I digress. As technology progressed, so did the control of information. In an interview, Swartz outlined this very well. Old broadcasting was limited by space in the airwaves, starting with 10 channels and eventually growing with cable to 500 channels, but someone still controlled what went on all of these channels.
And so what you see now is not a question of who gets access to the airwaves, it's a question of who gets control over the ways you find people. You know, you start seeing power centralizing in sites like Google, these sort of gatekeepers that tell you where on the internet you want to go, the people who provide you your sources of news and information.
And Aaron's goal with quotes like these seemed to be to limit the power of that gatekeeper as much as possible, because it's the first time in history that information can be freely available to someone who just has access to a public library. Walk into a library, get on a computer, look something up. You can find out who's evil. You can find out who assassinated who. You can find out who's on certain lists, not because you're in the know, but just because you have access to the internet. So to overcome the roadblocks that corporations and different institutions created to ensure that gatekeeping and therefore ensure profitability, Aaron wanted everyone to pitch in and do their part to make all available information publicly available. His manifesto called for civil disobedience against the privatization of knowledge, declaring it a moral imperative to download scientific journals and upload them to file sharing networks, which now you can just go to PubMed and find most anything. You can just find information. So this seems so alien that this is a war that he's involved in fighting, but students, librarians, and scientists were called on to use their positions of privilege to bring the banquet of knowledge to the rest of the world, which was locked out of it at that time. And Aaron wouldn't just call upon others to liberate the information hidden from the public. He would lead the charge personally, like Mel Gibson in the final battle of the Patriot. But in a new age, digital age, where instead of a nation an ocean away subjugating the revolutionaries, now corporations, institutions, and the government sought to centralize information essential to the evolution of human thinking and innovation. I have no idea what I'm talking about, but here's an example to help you and me understand. Works can be copyright protected for varying amounts of time depending on the number of authors, or if it was work for hire, or if it was published anonymously or under a pseudonym. Single authors' works are copyright protected for 70 years after the author's death, and multiple author works are for 70 years after the death of the last surviving author, and hired works are protected for 95 years after publication or 120 years from creation, whichever comes first. Anonymous, pseudonym works are also 95 to 120 years from publication creation, protected through copyright. Once that copyright protection period ends, the work becomes public domain and anyone can use it freely without worry of retribution or litigation or consequence. That's why we're now seeing Winnie the Pooh horror movies, with A.A. Milne's characters entering the public domain in 2021 after the copyright expired on the original 1926 books. Boom. Now, to be clear, the public domain isn't always respected when there is money to be made. Obviously, the philosophical transactions of the Royal Society continued to gatekeep content from 1665 behind a subscription paywall database when it should have been completely free to access by anybody wishing to view it, because it's 300 years old. You and nobody you know had anything to do with creating that information. And it's important to learn the past, and it's important to read things from it. There's a common colloquialism that I'm sure all of you have heard before from a guy by the name of George Santayana, which is, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. I thought that was from Spider-Man, but it turns out it was Batman. So here we have foundational information, hundreds of years of human history and documentation that is inaccessible unless you shelled out $19 an article for one person to view it on one computer for 1 month before access was withdrawn. That sounds like bullshit. And that's what Aaron Swartz and the open access movement were trying to completely dismantle. Now, this obviously wouldn't be an Oompaville video if there wasn't government involvement and conspiracy. Unknown to Swartz, federal surveillance had begun years before his arrest. The FBI flagged his email domain, aaronsw.com, during an Al-Qaeda counterterrorism investigation at the University of Pittsburgh. They assigned it case number 315THQ-C1475879 with the prefix 315 indicating international terrorism classification. He specifically was never the target of this Al-Qaeda investigation, but it put Aaron on the FBI's radar, and he wouldn't be leaving the radar of the FBI anytime soon. Soon, he would be the target of his own FBI investigation. I want you to think in your mind, what do you think this guy did to become the target of the FBI? Well, what did he do to become the target of the FBI? He downloaded information that was locked behind paywalls, more specifically, court documents. This is information that is publicly available. It is information that is digitized and, once again, publicly available. That's how court documents work. Just the way that he accessed it was wrong. Aaron had teamed up with Carl Malamud, the president and founder of public.resource.org, when he was 21 years old to help the nonprofit in its efforts to end the government's financial exploitation of public access to court electronic records, the PACER system. These are court documents, information that isn't protected at all by copyright because no one's making it. It's just important information for transparency in the justice system. What? Yet they were generating roughly $150 million a year from its fees of 10 cents per page for document viewing and 10 cents per page for search results when you look up a case. It's unbelievable. And the revenue PACER generated grew year after year, reaching $1.2 billion by 2016. And Aaron did the absolute unthinkable. He developed an automation script that downloaded millions of pages from PACER. And between September 4th and September 22nd, 2008, he used 2 accounts to make requests every 3 seconds, and over those 18 days, downloaded 8 million pages from PACER, which the FBI approximated to be worth $1.5 million of publicly available court documents. So that's 20% of the federal court database that he downloaded, and obviously, the government wasn't going to let that slide. So the FBI began searching for him and physically surveilling his home. And on February 4th, 2009, a synopsis of a field report reads as follows. Attempted to locate Aaron Swartz, his vehicles, driver's license, information, and picture, and others at 349 Marshman Avenue, Highland Park, Illinois, 60035. Successfully located driver's license photo for Swartz. Drove by address in an attempt to locate Swartz or vehicles related to the residence, but was unsuccessful. House is set on a deep lot behind other houses on Marshman Avenue. This is a heavily wooded, dead-end street with no other cars parked on the road, making continued surveillance difficult to conduct without severely increasing the risk of discovery. So, the big question is, did Swartz do anything actually illegal by downloading publicly available copyright-free information that should be available to everyone? The details provided on the first page of the FBI's documentation on the Swartz case stemming from this incident suggest that an argument could be made that it wasn't, or at most falls in a gray area. You see, US courts had implemented a pilot program at 17 depository libraries allowing users to access PACER systems for free, but from computers at these libraries. So Aaron used login information obtained from 2 libraries in this pilot program to access PACER for free, but from outside the library, which they realized from tracking Aaron's IP. He just wasn't in the right spot, which does that make it illegal or reasonable to be surveilled by the FBI? I'm not exactly sure. So perhaps that's why no formal charges were filed regarding this incident specifically, although surveillance would continue. Of course. Why, dude? Anyways, Aaron was just getting started, and soon he would undertake the monumental task of liberating the vast digital archives of journal storage, aka JSTOR. And this, unfortunately, would mark the beginning of the end for Aaron. The journal storage incident began on September 24th, 2010, when Swartz registered a laptop on MIT's network as Gary Host using a fake email address, and over the next 4 months, he would download 4.8 million academic articles from the JSTOR database, or 80% of Journal Storage's total library. His Python script, keepgrabbing.py, bypassed JSTOR's terms of service with a simple flag, except TC equals true. And when Journal Storage kind of caught on and blocked his IP address after he downloaded 450,000 articles in 11 hours, he switched to a new address and continued the downloads. On October 9th, 2010, during Columbus Day weekend, using a modified MAC address, he continued to download Journal Storage articles, but it started to bring down Journal Storage servers, nearly bringing down service worldwide. And Journal storage is very important at this time. And as a result of this, JSTOR blocked MIT's entire network, causing a 3-day campus-wide outage from October 9th to October 12th. But Aaron continued downloading undeterred, using new IP addresses to circumvent blocks and slowing the rate of downloads to avoid detection from monitoring systems, though he couldn't evade capture forever. To make this fully make sense, we have to detail the scale and influence of JSTOR, or journal storage. I'm going to paint them as a little bit villainous here to create a sort of bad guy for Aaron to be the vigilante hero going in after them, because that's kind of the reality. For context, JSTOR is a massive nonprofit digital library holding thousands of journals. This is not like people's personal journals, but rather scientific journals. It's millions of articles and other primary sources and books. It serves over 11,000 institutions, schools, and universities globally. It's where you get legit information that has been compiled by legit people. Titles for JSTOR come from over 1,200 publishers in 57 countries, making it a modern day equivalent to the Library of Alexandria. And to access this database, you have to pay. And the pricing becomes very convoluted depending on whether or not you are a corporate, for-profit, or nonprofit / government entity, and how many collections you want access to as well. Small nonprofits could look at annual fees from $1,200 a year to $18,000 a year. Medium-sized universities could pay between $50,000 and $83,000 a year. And corporate for-profit organizations range from $9,000 to $65,000 and up per year, depending on how many journals you regularly use. And individuals could access the journal storage outside of being a part of a school, corporation, or institution, but if you wanted to download from the database, it costs you $19.50 a month, and you can download 10 PDFs for that $19. And over a year, for $200, you could download 120 PDFs. So it's like a little bit of a discount. In newsflash, that's the current pricing. It used to be much worse, and barriers used to be far more inaccessible. For example, Al Jazeera reported an opinion piece on pricing to access academic articles, which used to cost on average $19 an article. And in 2019, JSTOR and ARTSTOR, then separate entities that later became integrated, contributed $89.1 million in program service revenue to its parent company, Ithaca Harbor's nearly $104 million of total revenue, according to pages 9 and 12 of its Form 990 tax filings from that year. Pretty lucrative nonprofit organization. But of course, that money goes towards salaries for staff, licensing of their journals and articles, and infrastructure, and their expansion of their library. But I don't know if it costs $79 million to do all that, all right? I don't know if it costs that. Maybe let me do it. I'll do it for less. So yeah, and an attempt to break down where JSTOR's money goes alleges that from their findings, 30% goes to publishers for the rights to license their articles and journals and works, etc. 70% goes to overhead, which 10% of that is for running servers, 40% of that is salaries, and 20% to admin costs. We attempted to verify these numbers for the 2019 filing, but the findings are unlikely to be fully accurate, as JSTOR is the biggest earner and entity within Ithaca, but not the full entity because of ARTSTOR as well. I'm sorry. JSTOR made $79.1 million and ARTSTOR made $9.9 million. So journal storage made up 85% of Ithaca Harbor's total revenue for that year. And page 10 of Ithaca Harbor's 2019 Form 990 shows that they claimed $19 million went to fees and publisher payments, which is 21% of the total earnings from JSTOR and ARTSTOR. Page 10 also shows that salaries made up $32.1 million of Ithaca Harbor's expenses, and compensation to officers, directors, trustees, and key employees that make up another $5.4 million, for a total of $37.5 million in cost for salaries. They reported 428 employees for the year as well, and on page 5 they show the average salary at $75,000 a year. But Kevin Guthrie, president and trustee of Ithaca Harbor, earned $557,000 that year alone, and according to the organization's filings between 2013 and 2023, he's been compensated a total of $5.8 million. And he's also seen significant raises year after year, growing from $398,000 in 2013 to $622,000 in 2023, and that's without even factoring in the filing's other compensation, which is another $62,000 in 2023. So it's kind of crazy. I'm not saying anything's wrong with that. Obviously, businesses got to be run, you know, nonprofits. There's a lot of weird stuff that goes on with this kind of thing. And it's especially weird that the nonprofit is paying employees nearly double the amount that it costs for them to license the scientific journals and articles and primary sources that they hide behind a paywall. It seems odd to me, considering they're literally just paying for work and just putting it on a website, which is what Wikipedia does for free, I think, but obviously Wikipedia is cringe. So I don't know, maybe it's just Netflix or HBO Max for nerds and dweebs and libtards who want to read scholarly records. I have no idea. One thing I do know is that streaming services like HBO and Netflix are just platforms for movies and shows that are not funded by taxpayers. That's some of the biggest criticism for JSTOR, is that government entities pay for these things using our money. And not only that, but a lot of the research is funded and granted by the taxpayers as well. The research that is then being doubly paywalled. So journal storage has a healthy revenue stream specifically that stems from charging rates that block public access to research that is funded by taxpayer dollars, and then that knowledge is then privatized and funded by public grants, which is taxpayer funding. It's pretty complicated and really unfortunate that that's a thing. Now, to be very clear, tax records and revenue aside, JSTOR are now big proponents of open access post Aaron Swartz era, okay, guys? They are the boogeyman at this point in time that we're talking about, 2008, 2010, 2011, 2013. That's them at this point, while Aaron is sucking them dry on the MIT campus. So once again, they're big proponents of open access now, and they have massively changed their tone over the years. And that is completely commendable and very respectable. It's just trying to be as transparent as possible for this video. And on January 4th, 2011, network engineers were able to trace the exact location of the IP address that was downloading from the servers. This location was in a basement closet of MIT campus building 16, where the network switches were located, from which a cable ran under a cardboard box. Then under that hid a laptop computer and an external hard drive. So police were notified immediately, and they even attempted to copy the hard drive, but were unsuccessful. And instead they took fingerprints from the laptop and left it in the exact same spot and returned the room to the way that it had been before they interfered. Their goal was to wait for whoever installed it to come back and catch them basically doing it, or surveil them further. So they returned the room to its original state and set up a camera to film whoever returned for the laptop. And on January 6th, 2011, Aaron Swartz returned to the basement closet to retrieve the laptop and was caught on video spending over 10 minutes in the room. And after disconnecting the laptop, a monitoring script sent an email to one of the campus engineers who, although not on campus at the time, was unable to reach anyone in time to apprehend Aaron while he was in building number 16. Aaron would soon reconnect to the network from building 4 and then the Stratton Student Center, and an hour and a half after he initially disconnected from the network, causing the monitoring script to see in the email that Aaron was on campus, campus police identified him on his bicycle. After following Aaron briefly to give backup time to respond, an MIT campus police officer confronted Aaron, who would then abandon his bicycle and flee on foot, saying that MIT police weren't real cops, which is hilarious. He outpaced the officer and eventually must have believed that he'd evaded because he slowed back down to a walk, but the officer had maintained visual contact. Then backup showed up and 2 officers closed in on him, and they apprehended him, handcuffed him, and found the laptop as well as the hard drive in his backpack. Then immediately after his capture, the response from the federal government was swift and severe. He was indicted by federal prosecutors facing 4 different felony charges. 1, unlawfully obtaining information from a protected computer, recklessly damaging a protected computer, wire fraud, and computer fraud. But the thing was, neither MIT nor JSTOR would pursue any civil penalties against Aaron Swartz. So that's very important. These institutions that he was stealing from didn't want to pursue any penalties. They didn't want to press anything against him, which is so confusing to me. Journal Storage wasn't interested in any legal process and even made a public statement saying that once the content was secure, they were completely satisfied. And they were very sure to specify that the government decided to prosecute Aaron Swartz and not them. On the 14th of September 2011, Aaron's father, Robert, met with MIT's chancellor and was told that MIT's position was neutral. And roughly a year later, on September 28th, 2012, Aaron's attorneys asked MIT to meet with the U.S. Attorney's Office in support of Aaron. And on October 26, 2012, they told Aaron's attorneys that they were willing to accompany the defense and even share that they admired Aaron's work and that losing it would be a great loss. But through a shift in Aaron's defense team in November, his new attorney ceased that collaboration entirely. So after learning all of this, it makes it seem like the 2 leading institutions that were actually affected by Aaron's actions were maybe not on his side, but they certainly weren't his enemies. And an important factoid, Aaron wasn't actually a student at MIT, which is why they were taking a neutral stand. MIT even shared that if Aaron had been a student, they would have gotten more involved and potentially even lobbied against prosecution, as it would have been an internal matter for their discipline committee to handle instead of the federal government, which I don't understand why he was targeted by the federal government anyway. It doesn't make any sense. And then, you know, the whole point of this is to show the example of the, big meta and broccoli head, Mark Wahlberg, or whatever the fuck his name is. In spite of the chirping from MIT, U.S. Attorney Carmen Ortiz was undeterred and wholly committed to seeing Aaron serve time, saying, "Stealing is stealing, whether you use a computer command or a crowbar, whether you take documents, data, or dollars. It is equally harmful to the victim whether you sell what you have stolen or give it away," which the victim in this case is researchers that have been paid through federal grants by tax dollars. Like, I don't, there's not really that many victims in this crime, to be honest. Also, Journal Storage was completely content with getting its content back, and MIT wasn't pursuing legal consequences for Aaron and didn't consider themselves a victim and ultimately didn't want a trial to ensue because it would have been a waste of time and resources. So the victims, he was trespassing at MIT and stealing from Journal Storage. Both of the institutions didn't give a fuck. In spite of all this, Aaron was still being threatened with up to 35 years in prison at the time for the 4 charges, as well as $1 million in fines for theft of digital documents. But even calling it theft is an absolute stretch. MIT allowed users to create guest accounts that could access Journal Storage through their institutional subscription to the database, which is what Aaron did, just with a fake name and email. So he did something legal adjacent that we could just do. You could just do if you were on. It's weird. It's like putting someone in jail for taking too many books from the library and then reading them to children for bedtime for free too much. Also undeterred was Aaron. Aaron's activism and demands for open access to hidden and restricted information weren't finished just because of some pesky federal charges. On January 18th, 2012, Aaron's organization, Demand Progress, spearheaded an online protest that would affect the entire internet landscape in a peaceful protest against restricted access to knowledge. During this protest, the internet went completely dark. Over 115,000 websites participated in, up until that point, the most significant internet protest in history to defeat the Stop Online Privacy Act and the Protect Intellectual Property Act in a coordinated blackout, which Wikipedia, Reddit, and even Google joined. You guys might remember this. Google covered its logo with a large black rectangle. Reddit changed its splash page for 12 hours to "Reddit is down," and Wikipedia had the words "Imagine a world without free knowledge." Wikipedia also included a zip code search to find contact information for your local representatives. Millions answered the call in protest, and as a result of Aaron's movement, for their own representatives to represent them, do what they are elected to do, represent. 4 million emails were sent, 10 million signatures were collected, and 8 million phone calls were made, and also 3 million tweets were shared, which is crazy because Twitter was only a year old. The acts that were being protested against, the SOPA and PIPA, would have given ISPs free rein to block access to websites if they had credible evidence that they contained copyrighted material. So websites containing information to circumvent those blocks would be targeted even if just one link was posted. And anyone found guilty of this could face up to 5 years in jail. How unbelievable is that? And lo and behold, these were the people that supported those bills. Movie studios, music publishers, TV networks, people with money. Lots of big money people in there, which just having money doesn't mean you're a bad person, but thinking this is the right way does, objectively. They were opposed by basically everybody else, which is why on January 23rd, 2012, the PIPA's motion to proceed was unanimously withdrawn, and there has been no action on SOPA since December 16th, 2011. So both fell completely flat as a result of this protest. This accomplishment was so impactful that at the Freedom to Connect conference held on May 21st and 22nd, 2012 in DC, Aaron Swartz gave a keynote speech called "How We Stopped SOPA." While Aaron was being celebrated by the world at large for his efforts to make more information publicly available for free, if not all information, and actually doing something about it rather than just being some kind of spokesperson, the U.S. Attorney's Office of the United States Justice Department still saw Aaron as a criminal to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And 4 months after his keynote speech in September 2012, the United States of America versus Aaron Swartz case escalated with the introduction of a superseding indictment, which increased the number of felony charges against Aaron from 4 to 13. Counts 1 and 2 were for wire fraud, with Aaron allegedly defrauding journal storage of content they had invested in, collecting and digitizing, as well as defrauding MIT for deceptively making it appear as though he was affiliated with them by using their network to then access journal storage. Counts 3 to 7 were for computer fraud because Aaron accessed protected MIT and journal storage computers without authorization. And counts 8 through 12 were for unlawfully obtaining information from a protected computer. So it's essentially the same as counts 3 to 7, but they specify that the information gained through the unlawful access had a value exceeding $5,000. Count 13 was for recklessly damaging a protected computer, and this is due to an incident where his access to journal storage caused servers to go down, and in response, journal storage decided MIT's journal storage access should be revoked for several days. It's clear they were trying to prosecute to the fullest extent, and the timing of all this was not coincidental. Prosecutors used his 2008 Guerilla Open Access Manifesto as proof of malicious intent in a briefing with congressional staffers with the House Oversight Committee, despite no proof that he ever intended to distribute the downloaded articles. On to the prosecution's approach. In my opinion, it is a pattern of intimidation and overreach that is nothing but disturbing. Assistant U.S. Attorney Stephen Heyman, son of former Deputy Attorney General Philip Heyman, led the charge with a level of zeal that is completely uncalled for. Supposedly, he was the uncompromising voice in the office of Ortiz, who we talked about earlier for being quoted as saying this. Aaron's lawyers told the prosecutors that he was suicidal, and their response was completely cold and self-serving. They said, "Put him in jail. He'll be safe there." There's zero empathy, zero remorse, 0 sense. Really doesn't seem like that much of an account for justice, given the fact that the victims, which are supposed to be upheld through justice, were completely fine with what had happened. It didn't seem like they were doing this for anyone other than themselves. It was entirely self-serving and completely indicative of a prominent issue today. Government entities are forgetting that they serve the public, and they use their power and influence to make things better for themselves and or the adjacent institutions that they help represent as well, which they shouldn't represent institutions. They shouldn't represent BlackRock or Blackstone or McDonald's or whoever they should represent who they steal money from and then misappropriate to Israel. They should give me more money to clean my airsoft guns. Looking back at the prosecution now, it is so clear they were entirely out of touch, and comments made by Stephen Heyman would highlight that the continued efforts to prosecute Swartz were fueled by hate and a desperation to save face and just prosecute blindly. Heyman wanted MIT to cooperate with the prosecution's side of the legal battle and did so in one of the most insane ways possible. Reportedly, on August 9th, 2012, when speaking with a lawyer for MIT, he allegedly compared Swartz to a rapist and MIT to the rape victim. I don't even want to read this quote, but this is the quote. You can pause right here and read this if you'd like. "I'm surprised that Heyman didn't compare journal storage to being a victim of domestic violence who keeps going back to their abuser. Like, what are you fucking trying to say? Are you an idiot? Seems like it, brother." Also, the prosecutors are dragging this out instead of working with the defense to find reasonable middle ground resolution. What is the point of this? Like, it doesn't make any sense. The level of zeal that these crimes were approached with is, I mean, where is that energy anywhere, literally anywhere else? What is happening? Who are these people? They demanded that Swartz plead guilty to 13 felonies with no option available to him that would not result in jail time. And his attorney pleaded with the feds to find a way to resolve the case that didn't destroy Aaron's life, but they would not budge. For Swartz, accepting a felony conviction meant the end of his dreams. He feared being labeled a felon more than anything, and despite neither journal storage or MIT pursuing charges, aka the victims, though neither institution considered themselves a victim, he was completely sandbagged and just targeted by federal prosecutors. If you all don't remember, during this time, there was a lot of political targeting with the Obama administration. Swartz's case fit perfectly within that administration's unprecedented war on information activists. The administration prosecuted 8 people under the Espionage Act, more than all previous presidents combined, securing 526 months of prison time versus just 24 months in all of prior US history, not to mention the bombing of so many children's hospitals. Thanks, Obama. Before Obama's presidency, only 4 people in 3 cases ever faced charges. Daniel Ellsberg and Anthony Russo in 1973, with the charges later being dropped. Samuel Morrison in 1985, which was a 24-month sentence that was later pardoned, and Larry Franklin in 2005 with a 10-month sentence. Here are some highlights under the Obama administration, the great administration of our lifetimes, it seems, which it absolutely wasn't, by the way, just in case you're unaware. It was shit too. Chelsea Manning received 35 years for WikiLeaks disclosures. NSA whistleblower Thomas Drake faced 35 years before his case collapsed. CIA whistleblower John Kirikow got 30 months for exposing a secret CIA torture program, amongst more. Ever heard of Edward Snowden? Then come the connections from Swartz to these people. They are explicit. Swartz had filed FOIA requests about Manning's treatment on December 27, 2010, just days before beginning his final journal storage downloads, and WikiLeaks later claimed he had assisted them and communicated with Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks. Aaron was also developing SecureDrop with Kevin Poulsen, which is a platform for anonymous whistleblowing to journalists. He also founded an insanely based website called watchdog.net in 2008 that aggregated data on political corruption, and with similar operation to change.org. Plus, his leadership in defeating SOPA had demonstrated his ability to mobilize millions of people against corporate and government power and the extensions of both. The Secret Service had over 14,000 pages of documents related to Aaron Swartz. Why? What's wrong? Read the Wikipedia page, read the information on Aaron Swartz, find me what's wrong. Find me one thing. Luckily, we do have internal government communications that reveal the political nature of the prosecution, because of course, it's political. Heyman admitted he was angered by Swartz's wild internet campaign after initially allowing him to surrender without arrest. The DOJ explicitly cited his manifesto as evidence, treating his philosophy of information freedom as proof of criminal intent, which is mind-boggling. And as congressional investigators later noted, prosecutors believed they needed a felony conviction to justify having filed the case against him in the first place. God, I mean, people are bitching about freedom of speech now. Things are never more in our favor. They've never been more in our favor in terms of freedom of expression online and just in general. This is unbelievable. It's like crazy that this seems like an alternate reality. It's unbelievable. And unfortunately, there is no happy ending. This ended horribly. The prosecution ended in January of 2013 when Aaron unfortunately took his own life. After 2 years that had drained Swartz financially and emotionally, his savings were gone. He needed to raise $1 million for trial defense and dreaded making fundraising calls. And on the evening of January 10th, the day before he died, Swartz attended a friend's birthday party in Manhattan and appeared animated, was eating his favorite foods, grilled cheese and mac and cheese, but by the next morning, his mood underwent what his girlfriend, Taryn Steinbricker Kaufman, called a drastic turn. He wouldn't get out of bed despite her shaking him and pouring some water on him, and she left for work, asking friends to check on him. And that evening, January 11th, 2013, she returned to their Brooklyn apartment to pick him up for dinner, and she found Aaron's body hanging from a belt. He was 26 years old, and he left no note. Aaron's death sparked immediate outrage and demands for accountability, as well as poured gas on the fire of what he was fighting for. The prosecutors who had bullied him relentlessly for years at this point were accused of driving him to suicide, and Swartz lawyers reached out to the DOJ's Office of Professional Responsibility to request an investigation into U.S. Attorney Stephen Heyman. They believed that the prosecution had failed to disclose evidence and had also violated his right to a trial by jury as outlined in the Sixth Amendment through coercion. Those who were hit the hardest by his death were, of course, his family and girlfriend. His family put out a statement laying blame at the feet of the criminal justice system and MIT for maintaining neutrality throughout the case when they could have massively helped. They left with this quote: "Aaron's death is not simply a personal tragedy, it is the product of a criminal justice system rife with intimidation and prosecutorial overreach. Decisions made by officials in the Massachusetts U.S. Attorney's Office and at MIT contributed to his death. The U.S. Attorney's Office pursued an exceptionally harsh array of charges, carrying potentially over 30 years in prison to punish an alleged crime that had no victims. And meanwhile, unlike journal storage, MIT refused to stand up for Aaron and its own community's most cherished principles. At Aaron's memorial, his girlfriend Taryn gave a speech in which her message is clear and repeated throughout. She said, "Aaron's death should radicalize us." Within weeks of Aaron's death, a bipartisan congressional investigation began, with House Oversight Chairman Darrell Issa and Ranking Member Elijah Cummings demanding answers from Attorney General Eric Holder, calling the charges ridiculous and trumped up. The upgrading of Aaron's 4 charges to 13 charges is evidence of prosecutors overcharging in an attempt to stack the odds in their favor. The Stanford School of Law even believed as much, detailing how each charge is a chance for the prosecution to win, and conviction on one count could result in punishment for all of his conduct, and the only real victory would be a complete acquittal. The House Oversight investigation specifically asked whether Swartz's opposition to SOPA or his advocacy work were factors in the prosecution, which was proven by Heyman's comments on his manifesto, as well as the desperation to make anything stick to justify bringing the charges in the first place. Issa also saw this as an opportunity for Congress to take up Swartz's cause of making information freely available to the public, believing that what is paid for is as widely available as possible to the American people. Aaron's cause as a topic of discussion within Washington affecting fundamental and tangible law had begun with SOPA and POPA being toppled, but his death created a snowball effect that would continue to gain momentum through time. And in February 2013, during the Obama administration, a White House memorandum known as the Holdren Memo sought to increase access to federally funded scientific research. It wasn't perfect, obviously, and an optional 12-month embargo could be placed on publications, temporarily creating a barrier for those without the financial means or university library privileges to access the content. But in August 2022, during the Biden administration, a new White House memorandum known as the Nelson Memo was released, which eliminated the 12-month embargo option, making it so all the federally funded research would be available freely without delay, which is awesome. A bipartisan bill called Aaron's Law was introduced by U.S. Representative Zoe Lofgren, Senator Ron Wyden, and Senator Rand Paul, seeking to target serious criminals better and curb overzealous prosecutions for non-malicious computer and internet offenses. Because there's nothing malicious about that at all, about what happened. Nothing at all. It's totally fucked up. Luckily, this had support from both sides of the aisle, but private interests, of course, got in the way, because that's what happens. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle the support comes from. It matters which side of those scales, the money scales, the support comes from, and which foreign asset wants the support, wants the lobbying. Lobbying from tech companies like Oracle influenced lawmakers, and the bill died before passing in Congress. So suck my dick and balls. What Aaron represented is absolutely impossible to destroy, with even journal storage becoming an advocate for open access. And they, throughout time, have made their library significantly more accessible, which is huge and very important. They even have a blog page all about how open access initiatives bridge resource gaps and unlock knowledge for average people. They define open access and detail their growth in participating in the movement, making thousands of journals and ebooks open access, with over 34,000 research reports from over 140 institutions, which is really cool. They have a daily publication that covers current events with publicly available content, and they work with institutions like Cornell University, Johns Hopkins, and hundreds more to disseminate knowledge freely. And JSTOR has over 800,000 freely accessible pieces contributed by museums, archives, and artists worldwide, which that's just art. It's just art, so it's not as important. But journal storage has also made it possible for individuals to access their library for free, but they're limited to viewing 100 articles per month and cannot download any access content, but they can still access it. If you want unlimited viewing and the ability to download works, you gotta still pay for it. It's $19 a month. Okay, better though, better than, it's improved. And journal storage still brings in a lot of money, but the money that they're making is from institutions and governments that need large access accounts for all their employees, students, agents, etc., or individuals like Dr. Johann Faustus, motherfuckers with the insatiable need for knowledge. The developments in open access have been a fantastic thing for the public. I use PubMed constantly, where you can find publicly funded research papers and health-related stuff just for free. You can read it. It's awesome. So there's definitely some positive, but it's not without the tragedy that it took Aaron's death to inspire a drastic change. U.S. attorneys and federal agencies sought to crucify Aaron for something that is basically normal now. And there's so many examples of this. People still serving sentences for possessing marijuana, which it's legalized, but it's very unfair. There's a lot of very unfair shit, especially when you start reading, guys. When there's open access to information. It's weird how unfair things become and how up it all looks. Aaron wasn't publicly calling for everything that's ever been written to be available to the public for free. Obviously, things like art and entertainment and shit like that should absolutely, people should be able to make money off it. People should definitely be able to make money off of their work. But if it's a publicly funded research paper, are you kidding me? What the fuck? The Twilight books, for example, are not foundational to modern society. They should not be made open access. I'd pay for them for sure. Is Audible stifling human innovation by keeping the 29-hour-long combined audiobooks of the extended edition of the original book, as well as a gender-swapped retelling by charging $22 to $31.50 to access them? Accessing scholarly musings like that for free would be piracy. It would be wrong. But like journals, publicly, right? Aaron had utilized legitimate means to obtain free access to Pacer and journal storage through institutions that gave access to their guests. And not to mention those institutions didn't even give a fuck. So what if you actually commit real piracy? What happens then? What if you commit piracy on an even grander scale than Aaron Swartz allegedly didn't? Or did, or didn't, or did? You'll be held liable for your actions, right? Like, what if you actually break the law? You'll be held liable for your actions, right? You'll be held liable for your actions, right? Not if you pirate over 180,000 books to train your AI model, seems like. Back in January of this year, it was widely reported that Meta, the company behind Facebook and Instagram, had been pirating millions of books, articles, and magazines under direction from CEO Mark Zuckerberg. Meta downloaded the Library Genesis dataset, which contains 7.5 million books and 81 million research papers, along with the Books Cubed dataset of 180,000 plus pirated books, totaling 81.7 terabytes of copyrighted material obtained via torrenting sites. Library Genesis, LibGen, and Books Cubed are shadow libraries of pirated books and other writings and works. And internal Meta communications show employees explicitly acknowledged using a dataset we know to be pirated, with one noting that torrenting from a corporate laptop doesn't feel right. Are you kidding me? Despite Meta employees recognizing the legal risk as medium high, Mark Zuckerberg personally approved using LibGen after the issue was escalated to MZ. I assume that's Mark Zuckerberg, broccoli head. Meta employees systematically removed copyright notices, ISBNs, and all rights reserved text to conceal their piracy, and even actively seeded torrents, distributing the pirated content to other users. One director even admitted that licensing even one single book would undermine their plan to claim it fell into fair use, revealing they chose piracy as faster and cheaper than legal licensing. Mind you, I think piracy's fine if you don't have money. You're not gonna buy something anyways. I don't really give a f at all. I've never pirated anything ever in my life. I was very rich growing up on the internet. Extremely money and wealth. Seems like though, when corporations do it, it's fine. I'm sensing a juxtaposition here of when one man does it for a greater cause versus when $1 trillion company does it to make an AI model so we can ruin humanity. In response to a message from Lawrence van der Matten discussing the beliefs from team members that Meta should spend more on actually licensing data, specifically textbooks, Sergey Edenov, the director of engineering at Meta, responded by saying, "The problem is that people don't realize that if we license one single book, we won't be able to lean into fair use strategies, so we will have to drop all the LibGen and book datasets." Huh? He said that? That's crazy. Sergey also says that there are many issues with book licensing. Man, can you imagine the headaches that morals and ethics create for a $2 trillion company? They turned to piracy because it was too inconvenient and too costly to try and source books to train their AI models legitimately through, licensing them properly. So they can then make money off their AI, by the way. To be clear too, I'm all for fair use. I'm all for adding to shit, but training an AI with books that you're downloading illegally is just not. How can you even argue that? We can only argue if we spend no money. Other conversations between staff trying to figure out the best route to source large sets of books reveal the discussion of sites like Books Cubed. And they compare that to potentially paying $300 a book to license them commercially. So, They just stole them all, I guess. Genius. It's clear they knew exactly what they were doing, cutting corners. They referenced the fair use angle, a legally gray area, setting up Gen AI, their AI organization, to take the fall, saying they should be less risk averse. And Xavier Martinet, a research engineer at Gen AI, straight up references the colloquialism, ask for forgiveness, not for permission. What? And then says that a gazillion startups just pirated tons of books on BitTorrent, almost as if saying, if they're doing it, why shouldn't we? The contrast with the treatment of Swartz is staggering. Swartz wasn't being pursued by any of the institutions that he victimized, but still the government pursued him for allegedly illegally downloading vast amounts of information that typically required payment, but he found a legal way to access it for free. And in Meta's case, the government's not going after them at all. So that's good. They face 0 criminal charges despite clear evidence of knowing and deliberately pirating on an unprecedented scale to train an AI model. So there's no federal prosecution, but Meta was the target of lawsuits for copyright infringement from authors and even comedian Sarah Silverman. Plenty of lawsuits. But Meta obviously continues normal operations, facing only civil lawsuits from authors. OpenAI, Google, and other tech giants have engaged in similar practices using pirated data sets, yet still do not face criminal prosecution. So you can do it as long as you're not a guy. You have to be a massive conglomerate and have billions of dollars, and then you can do it. But if you're just a guy with a manifesto and principles, you can't do it. It's illegal when you do it like that. It's illegal. The main difference seems, though, that Aaron Swartz was an activist who was then hounded to death for downloading academic articles he had legal access to read, and Meta, a trillion-dollar company, systematically pirated millions of books with CEO approval, removed copyright notices to hide their crimes, and faces absolutely no federal criminal consequences whatsoever. It's baffling. It's baffling. It's very surprising, but also exactly what I expected. Anyways, guys, thank you for watching this. If you enjoyed, press the like button down below. Go to the Gump Club to see uncensored versions of these videos, and go to sour.gg to buy some candy. I have a candy company that I own with my wife, and we operate it locally.